The Krondon, recognizing the Aaathi's helplessness, moved in with little resistance. Their forces swept through the outer territories, systematically dismantling what remained of the Aaathi's infrastructure. Cities that had stood for centuries were reduced to ruins. The Aathi, desperate for survival, could do nothing but watch as their world crumbled around them. The Galactic Council, too embroiled in its own conflicts, refused to intervene. The Aathi, once a proud and peaceful people, were now considered insignificant, a species not worth saving. In the midst of this devastation, the Aathi sent out one final, desperate transmission. It was a message broadcast into the vast emptiness of space, a plea for help from anyone who might be listening. The Aathi knew the chances of someone responding were slim. Their message was little more than a cry into the void, a last attempt to find salvation where none seemed possible. As their planet fell further into ruin, they held on to the faintest hope that perhaps, somewhere, someone would hear them. The galaxy was vast, and in its endless expanse, humanity was a relatively new and mysterious presence. Unlike the older, more established species of the Galactic Council, humanity had no official representation. They were outsiders, viewed with suspicion and curiosity by the rest of the galaxy. Yet, despite their lack of political standing, rumors about humanity had begun to circulate, stories of their resilience, their adaptability, and their unconventional methods of warfare. These rumors, however, were largely dismissed by the Council. Humans were considered too primitive to pose any real threat or provide meaningful assistance in the galactic order. But humanity was not without its own motivations. As a species, they had always been driven by a sense of curiosity and a desire to explore the unknown. Their history was one of struggle and survival, a constant battle against the odds. Unlike the more advanced species of the galaxy, humanity had grown accustomed to fighting for its place in the universe, and it was this very trait that set them apart. When the Aaathi's transmission reached human ears, it was not a government body that responded. Instead, it was a group of independent explorers and military veterans, humans who had long since left Earth to chart their own course through the stars. These individuals, bound together by their shared experiences and their love of adventure, intercepted the Aaathi's message. At first, they were hesitant. The Aathi were an unknown species, and intervening in a conflict with the Krondon Empire was a dangerous proposition. Some argued that it wasn't their fight. Why risk their lives for a species they had never even heard of? But there was something in the Aaathi's message that resonated with the humans. It was a plea for help, a desperate cry from a people abandoned by the very institutions that were supposed to protect them. The humans, with their long history of fighting against the odds, understood what it meant to be left behind, to be considered expendable. They couldn't ignore the Aaathi's plight, not when they had the power to make a difference. The decision was made. The humans would intervene. They didn't have the backing of the Galactic Council, nor did they have the vast resources of the Krondon Empire. What they did have was experience, ingenuity, and a determination to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. As the humans made their way toward the Aathi homeworld, they knew they were walking into a dangerous situation. The Krondon Empire was not to be underestimated. But the humans weren't looking for an easy fight. They had come to the aid of the Aathi because it was the right thing to do, and they were prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The Aathi, huddled in the remnants of their once great cities, had all but given up hope. Their transmissions had gone unanswered for weeks, and the Krondon forces were closing in. But just as they were preparing for the worst, a new signal appeared on their scanners. It was faint at first, but as it grew stronger, they realized it wasn't Krondon. The Aathi dared to hope once more. Someone had heard their call, and that someone was humanity. When the distress signal from the Aathi reached human ears, it didn't fall into the hands of bureaucrats or military officials. Instead, it was intercepted by a fleet of independent human explorers and military veterans, a group that had long since abandoned the oversight of Earth's governing bodies. These were people who had chosen to carve out their own paths in the galaxy, far from the restrictions of politics and regulation. Their fleet was self-sufficient, relying on their wits, experience, and resourcefulness to survive in the harsh expanse of space. Their world was one of exploration, but it was also one of survival. The message from the aathi, filled with desperation and fear, sparked an immediate debate among the human crew. Some argued that it wasn't their fight. The aathi were an unknown species, and they were being attacked by the Krondon, one of the most dangerous forces in the galaxy. Engaging them would be a death sentence. They had no obligation to put themselves at risk for a people they had never met, especially when the Krondon Empire's reputation for merciless conquest was well known. Others, however, saw the situation differently. They argued that humanity's history was filled with moments of standing up for those who couldn't defend themselves. The aathi were clearly abandoned by the rest of the galaxy, left to die at the hands of an invading force. To ignore their call for help would be a betrayal of the very values that had shaped humanity's resilience. The debate raged on, with both sides presenting valid points. In the end, it was Commander Eve Marston who made the final decision. Eve was a seasoned leader, having seen her share of battles and losses. She understood the risks involved, but she also knew what it meant to fight for survival, not just for oneself but for those who couldn't fight for themselves. Eve stood before her crew and reminded them of humanity's legacy, of the countless times they had faced impossible odds and had come out stronger. She spoke of Earth's long history of resistance, of never backing down when faced with tyranny or oppression. The aathi, she argued, were not just another species to be abandoned. They were a reflection of humanity's own struggles, and that was worth fighting for. Her words resonated with the crew, and the decision was made. They would intervene. The human fleet entered aathi space cautiously, aware that they were entering a war zone. As they approached the aathi homeworld, the devastation left by the Krondon invaders became clear. Entire cities had been reduced to rubble, and the once thriving planet was now a shadow of its former self. The Krondon had left a mark of destruction wherever they went, and the humans were now witnessing the aftermath of that devastation. Scans of the planet showed a small group of survivors, huddled in what remained of their cities. The aathi were on the verge of extinction, their hope all but gone. Landing on the surface, the humans made contact with the aathi. At first, there was suspicion. The aathi had been abandoned by everyone they had once trusted. To them, humanity was an unknown force, one they had never heard of, let alone expected to come to their aid. The initial encounter was tense, but it didn't take long for the aathi to realize that the humans were not there to exploit them. They were there to help. The disbelief was palpable. How could a species that had no stake in their survival choose to fight on their behalf? The humans took the time to learn more about the aathi, who they were, and why they had been abandoned. Despite their technological inferiority, the aathi were a deeply intelligent and compassionate people. Their knowledge in the fields of diplomacy, resource management, and nonviolent sciences was vast, though it hadn't been enough to save them from the Krondon. The humans began to understand the full scale of the galactic failure. The aathi had been left to die not because they lacked value, but because they lacked power. This was a moral failure on the part of the galaxy, one that humanity could not ignore. Commander Marston, having seen the situation firsthand, made the decision that would set the course of the battle to come. Humanity would stand with the aathi, not because it was a strategic advantage, but because it was the right thing to do. The Krondon were a force that operated through fear and domination, but Marston knew that humans had faced worse before. They had survived wars, extinction events, and countless battles for survival. This was just another challenge, and one they were willing to face head-on. Eve gathered her team and addressed them. She reminded them that humanity's history was not one of conquest, but of survival. They had always fought for themselves, but they had also fought for others, those who couldn't defend themselves, those who had been wronged or oppressed. This was no different. The aathi were a peaceful people, abandoned by those who had promised to protect them. The galaxy had turned its back on them, but humanity would not. Eve's words were a rallying cry, and her team responded with a resolve that had been forged in the fires of countless battles. The decision was made to fortify the aathi planet. The humans knew they were outnumbered and outgunned by the Krondon forces, but they also knew that sheer numbers weren't the only factor in a battle. humanity had a long history of using unconventional tactics, of turning the tide in their favor through ingenuity, stealth, and determination. The planet was prepared for the inevitable invasion. Defensive perimeters were set up, and strategies were drawn. The aathi, though not fighters, provided invaluable knowledge about the planet's terrain and resources, helping the humans prepare for the oncoming assault. Word soon reached the Krondon that a human fleet had arrived in aathi space. The Krondon, initially dismissive of the humans as a minor inconvenience, began to take notice. Their scouts reported back, and soon the Krondon command was aware that humanity was fortifying the planet. To the Krondon, this was a challenge. They had no intention of letting a small, unknown species stand in the way of their conquest. A message was sent back to the Krondon Empire. Reinforcements would be dispatched, and the full might of the Krondon war machine would be unleashed on the aathi and their human defenders. As the humans prepared for the inevitable, there was no fear among the ranks. They knew what was coming, but they had faced worse before. They were not a species that backed down when faced with impossible odds. For them, this wasn't just a battle for survival, it was a battle for the very principles that had defined humanity's journey through the stars. The aathi had been left behind, but humanity was here now, and they weren't going to let the Krondon take the planet without a fight. The stage was set. War was coming, and the galaxy would soon learn what humans were truly capable of. The Krondon Empire arrived with all the confidence of a force that had never known defeat. Their fleet, massive and imposing, blotted out the stars as it descended on the aathi planet. To them, this was just another conquest, a weak race left vulnerable and ripe for the taking. They had expected no resistance, certainly not from an unknown species like humanity. But as the Krondon warships neared the planet, they quickly realized things weren't going to go as planned. Human ships, smaller and fewer in number, formed a protective ring around the planet. This unexpected presence caused the Krondon to pause, but only briefly. To Commander Zarvok, the leader of the Krondon fleet, this was a minor obstacle. He dismissed the humans as insignificant, a species with outdated technology, trying to play a game far beyond their capability. He anticipated that their defeat would be swift and brutal. But Zarvok was about to learn a hard lesson. The humans were not going to be an easy victory. As the battle began, the humans didn't engage in the typical direct assault that the Krondon were used to. Instead, they employed unorthodox tactics that confused and frustrated their enemies. Human ships darted in and out of the Krondon formation, striking quickly and then vanishing before the Krondon could retaliate. They used the natural geography of the aathi planet to their advantage, hiding in asteroid fields and launching hit-and-run attacks that chipped away at the Krondon fleet. What the Krondon expected to be a quick and decisive victory was turning into a prolonged and chaotic skirmish. The humans didn't fight by the rules of conventional warfare. Their tactics were erratic, unpredictable, and most importantly effective. They didn't rely on brute strength or overwhelming numbers. Instead, they used their ingenuity to level the playing field. They hacked into Krondon systems, sabotaging their communications and turning their own technology against them. Krondon warships, designed for overwhelming firepower, suddenly found themselves unable to coordinate effectively. Human fighters slipped through the cracks, striking at weak points and retreating before the Krondon could mount a proper defense. This was guerrilla warfare in space, and the Krondon had never seen anything like it. They were used to crushing their enemies with sheer force, but the humans refused to engage on those terms. The Krondon's superior technology became a liability, as the humans used their smaller, more agile ships to outmaneuver and outsmart them. Despite being vastly outnumbered, the humans fought with a relentless ferocity that shocked the Krondon commanders. Every time the Krondon thought they had the humans cornered, they would slip away, only to strike again from an unexpected direction. Zarvok, who had been so confident at the start of the battle, was now growing frustrated. He had underestimated the humans, and now his fleet was suffering for it. His communication systems were being disrupted, his ships were falling into disarray, and his forces were losing ground. The battle was no longer the easy conquest he had anticipated. It was a fight for survival, and the humans were proving themselves to be far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. At the heart of the human defense was Commander Eve Marston. She had orchestrated every move, using her knowledge of human warfare to exploit the Krondon's weaknesses. But she knew that the battle wasn't won yet. The Krondon were still a formidable force, and if they regrouped, they could overwhelm the human defenses. Marston decided that the time had come for a decisive strike. She gathered a small, elite team and launched a daring assault on the Krondon flagship. Their goal was simple: disable the Krondon communication systems and plunge their fleet into chaos. The assault was swift and precise. Marston's team infiltrated the Krondon flagship, using stealth and sabotage to reach the core of the ship's communication systems. They planted devices that disrupted the Krondon network, cutting off their ability to coordinate the battle. As the Krondon fleet descended into confusion, the humans pressed their advantage, launching a series of coordinated attacks that crippled several key ships. The aathi, who had been watching the battle unfold with a mixture of fear and awe, now saw an opportunity to help. Though they were not warriors, their deep knowledge of the planet's geography and resources proved invaluable. They began feeding intelligence to the humans, pointing out strategic locations and weak points in the Krondon formation. For the first time, the aathi were taking an active role in their own defense, inspired by the courage and determination of their human allies. The tide of the battle was turning. The Krondon fleet, once so sure of their victory, was now in full retreat. Their ships, unable to communicate or coordinate effectively, were picked off one by the relentless human forces. Zarvok, furious and humiliated, gave the order to withdraw. The Krondon Empire, for the first time in its history, had been forced to retreat from a battle they had expected to win easily. But even as the Krondon ships fled, Commander Marston knew that this was only a temporary victory. The Krondon Empire was vast, and they would not take this defeat lightly. Reinforcements would come, and when they did, they would come in greater numbers and with more firepower. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Humanity had made their stand, but now they had to prepare for the full might of the Krondon Empire. As the human fleet regrouped, there was no celebration. The crew understood the gravity of the situation. They had proven that humanity could stand up to the Krondon, but the cost had been high. Many ships had been lost, and the survivors were well aware that their victory had only bought them time. The Krondon would return, and when they did, they would be prepared for the human tactics. But there was also a quiet sense of pride. Against overwhelming odds, humanity had defied one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy. They had fought not for conquest or power, but to protect a species that had been abandoned by the rest of the galaxy. And they had won. For Commander Eve Marston, this was the beginning of a much larger struggle. She knew that the Krondon would be back, and the next time, they wouldn't underestimate humanity. But she also knew that humanity wasn't alone anymore. The aathi, once helpless and abandoned, had become allies. Together, they would prepare for the next battle. The Krondon would return, but when they did, they would face a united front, one that had already proven it could defy the odds. As the last of the Krondon ships disappeared into the stars, Marston stood with her crew, knowing that the real fight was still ahead. They had won the battle, but the war for the survival of the aathi, and perhaps all of humanity, was just beginning. Commander Eve Marston understood the stakes. The Krondon would return, and when they did, they would bring the full force of their empire. This time, there would be no underestimation, no small skirmish. The Krondon intended to wipe humanity and the aathi from existence. Marston knew her fleet wasn't equipped to face what was coming, but that didn't matter. Humanity had never won through superior numbers or technology. They had always relied on their resilience, adaptability, and refusal to yield. Now, more than ever, these traits would be tested. The preparations for the final stand began in earnest. The aathi, though not soldiers, offered their expertise in planetary resources and infrastructure. Their knowledge of the terrain allowed the humans to set up defensive perimeters in places the Krondon wouldn't expect. Marston worked day and night with her crew, forging new strategies and planning for every possible scenario. They fortified key locations and prepared their ships for the inevitable clash. There was no room for error. They had to make every strike count. As the human forces fortified the Aathi planet, an unexpected visitor arrived. A diplomatic envoy from the Galactic Council, having heard rumors of the humans' defiance, appeared in the system. They were shocked to find a small human fleet standing between the Aathi and the oncoming Krondon forces. The Council envoy had not come to offer aid, however. Instead, they came with warnings. The Aathi were a lost cause, the envoy claimed. Fighting the Krondon was futile. The Council had long decided that the Aathi were expendable, and humanity was risking everything for a people that weren't worth saving. The envoy urged Marston to abandon the fight. It wasn't too late to retreat. The Krondon would destroy everything in their path, and no one, not even the humans, could stop them. The Aathi weren't worth the cost. But Marston, never one to back down from a challenge, refused. She stood firm, delivering a speech that would later be remembered throughout the galaxy. She spoke not of strategic advantages or political power, but of humanity's values. Humanity had always fought for the underdog, for the oppressed, for those who couldn't fight for themselves. The Aathi weren't just another race to be cast aside. They were living beings who had been abandoned by the very institutions that were supposed to protect them. Marston declared that humanity would never be the kind of species that turned its back on the vulnerable. The Krondon sought to dominate the weak, but humans had always defied those who thought themselves invincible. They had fought their way to survival time and time again, and this would be no different. Her words echoed across the battlefield, igniting a fierce determination in her crew and inspiring the Aathi to continue their fight. The Galactic Council envoy, silenced by Marston's conviction, left without another word. Humanity had made its choice. They would not abandon the Aathi, no matter the cost. The Krondon Empire returned as expected, and this time their fleet was massive, far larger than before. Wave after wave of warships descended upon the Aathi planet, blotting out the sky and shaking the ground as they approached. The final battle had begun. Humanity and the Aathi stood side by side, ready to face the overwhelming odds. The battle was brutal. Human ships were destroyed one after another as the Krondon forces pressed their advantage. The Krondon commanders believed they had learned from their previous mistakes, and they were confident that this time there would be no escape for the humans. But despite the losses, humanity's spirit never wavered. Every ship that went down took Krondon vessels with it. Every Krondon advance was met with human ingenuity and Aathi resourcefulness. The Krondon were prepared for a conventional fight, but humanity refused to give them one. They used every trick in the book, from guerrilla tactics to hacking into the Krondon systems, causing confusion and disorder among the enemy ranks. The planet's natural terrain was used to great effect, with human and Aathi forces ambushing Krondon ground troops at every turn. The Krondon commanders, though confident in their numbers, found themselves increasingly frustrated as their meticulously planned strategies fell apart under the relentless and unpredictable human resistance. As the battle raged on, word of humanity's defiance began to spread across the galaxy. Species that had once ignored the plight of the Aathi began to take notice. Some, inspired by the humans' bravery, sent small fleets to assist in the fight. Though their contributions were limited, they bolstered the human defenses and helped to turn the tide of key skirmishes. However, most of the galaxy remained on the sidelines, unwilling to risk the wrath of the Krondon Empire. Within the Galactic Council itself, there was division. Some argued that humanity's stand was foolish and doomed to failure. Others, however, saw it as a sign that the balance of power in the galaxy was shifting. The humans, a species the Council had barely acknowledged, were proving to be a force that could not be easily dismissed. The Council debated intervention, but no decision was made. For now, humanity was on its own. In the chaos of the battle, Commander Marston knew that a decisive move was needed. The Krondon fleet, though massive, was vulnerable at its core, the flagship. Marston gathered her team for one final mission, a daring assault on the Krondon command ship. If they could disable the Krondon leadership, it could throw the entire invasion into disarray. With precision and determination, Marston and her team launched their assault. They infiltrated the Krondon flagship, fighting their way through the enemy forces to the ship's command center. Once inside, they sabotaged the ship's systems, crippling its ability to communicate with the rest of the fleet. Chaos erupted within the Krondon ranks as their leadership lost control of the battle. The tide had turned. Without their commanders to guide them, the Krondon forces began to falter. The human and aathi forces seized the opportunity, launching a coordinated counterattack that pushed the Krondon back. One by one, the massive Krondon warships fell, and soon the invincible Krondon fleet was in full retreat. The galaxy was stunned. Humanity, a species the Galactic Council had barely taken notice of, had not only defended the aathi but had defeated one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy. The Krondon Empire, which had never known defeat, was forced to withdraw, humiliated and broken. The aathi were saved, and humanity had earned its place in galactic history. They were no longer outsiders, no longer a species to be overlooked. Their actions had changed the perception of their entire race. They had stood up against tyranny, fought for the weak, and won against impossible odds. Commander Eve Marston's name would be remembered for generations to come. The Krondon Empire would never forget the day they were defeated by a small, scrappy human fleet. The galaxy now knew that humans were not to be underestimated. The aathi, once abandoned and forgotten, were safe once more, and the story of humanity's defiance would become a legend across the stars.